campaign later in the program. But right now, you can visit our website at www.givebackarkansas.org to learn more. As director of the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, our state's Black History Museum, nationally accredited, I might add, can't think of a more fitting place than to kick off our annual convening than right here, but more specifically in this gallery, Black School Excellence, the Legacy of Dunbar. Dunbar High School was said to be the premier source of Black education in the state of Arkansas, producing many of our state's African-American leaders. This would have not been made possible if it were not for the spirit of philanthropy from the community of Little Rock and across the country. At the Arkansas Black Philanthropy Collaborative, we are keeping this spirit alive and strong. We have an amazing lineup today, and we are so glad that you are spending your Giving Tuesday with us. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Derek Lewis II for our grand opening remarks. Thank you.
Hi, Derek Lewis, the president of the Derek Lewis Foundation and the chair of the Arkansas Black Philanthropy Collaborative. I'm serving as your host for the ABPC's Inaugural Convening. Thank you for joining us. Before I get into what's in store for us today, I wanted to give you a little background on the ABPC. In 2018, I joined a group of other Black philanthropic leaders over dinner to discuss how we could work together to build a network for Black philanthropy in Arkansas. As we sat around the table to imagine a better future for our state, we decided to meet regularly and to establish a plan on how to organize Black people and Black philanthropic dollars. Fast forward to 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was having a disproportionate effect on Black Americans, and the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor led increasingly urgent calls for racial justice across the nation and around the world. As a result, corporations began redirecting dollars to Black-led organizations and Black communities to combat systemic racism. Arkansas Community Foundation will be among 20 community foundations to receive a $1 million grant to distribute to local nonprofits serving Black people and communities with preference of Black-led organizations. More on that soon. Around the same time, the ABPC was formalized through the Derek Lewis Foundation, with the seed funding provided by the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. From the initial brainstorming meeting over dinner to partnerships that formed between 3 Arkansas-based foundations, the ABPC has been larger than one person or one organization from the start. It is the result of people coming together to solve some of our state's biggest challenges. Our theme for today's convening is gaining more through giving back. You'll hear from Black philanthropic professionals across the country as we discuss what this means for Black philanthropy in Arkansas. Our first panel on gaining more will provide an historical perspective on how Black people have shown up as philanthropists in communities across the U.S. and how being aware of our contributions can shift the narrative around what it means to be a philanthropist. Our second panel on giving back will explore the future of giving and what the future of giving looks like for Black communities. Again, we appreciate you for tuning in to our first ever convening. Stay tuned for some good conversation and exciting announcements. I'll see you soon.
Hi, I'm Sharice West Scantleberry, Chief Executive Officer of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. At the Foundation, our mission is to relentlessly pursue economic, educational, social, ethnic, and racial equity for all Arkansans. For this reason, WRF is proud to be among the founding funders of the Arkansas Black Philanthropy Collaborative. The Arkansas Black Philanthropy Collaborative was established to enhance the growth, sustainability, impact, and sense of community among Black-led anchor institutions in the state. Whether it's a church or a local nonprofit that provides basic needs, Black-led organizations serve as the backbone of communities of color throughout the state of Arkansas. If we want to ensure these organizations sustain their position as critical providers, it is necessary that they are well-resourced, which will enable them to function at their highest capacity. WRF sees the ABPC as essential to help ensure the long-term viability of Black-led organizations and the communities they serve. ABPC seeks to apply an innovative, dynamic, and replicable approach to capacity building that further develops the nonprofit sector with a lens towards race and equity. We are proud to support the ABPC to co-create and advance a social, ethnic, and racial equity movement that activates communities across the state as agents of positive change. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the program.
Arkansans have to choose. The world is changing rapidly. The way we live and work is constantly evolving. Those changes can deepen our division, or they can unite us in the recognition that we all want a prosperous future. We can choose an equitable Arkansas. The Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation partners with changemakers to relentlessly pursue economic equity, educational equity, and social, ethnic, and racial equity. An equitable Arkansas is a state where everyone earns enough to live beyond just their basic needs. Everyone lives in a thriving economy, and everyone is able to save for the future. To get there, we will make greater investment in the hard-working people in places that have been denied hope for the longest time. We will support creative and innovative problem solving by those same people in those same places to reverse the effects of years of disinvestment, to build the local power needed to create lasting positive change, to remove the systemic barriers that slow our progress, and to chart a path to an Arkansas with a thriving economy, excellent schools in every community, and strong communities in every part of the state. What does the future hold for Arkansas? Arkansans hold the answer. When we work together, we will all reap the rewards. Our Equity 2025. Join the movement for an equitable Arkansas.
Hi, I'm Tamika Edwards, Special Advisor to the CEO on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement at Central Arkansas Water, the best tasting water this side of glory. And I'm an advisory committee member of the Arkansas Black Philanthropy Collaborative, ABPC. ABPC was organized to connect Black philanthropic leaders and design Black-led solutions for social change in Arkansas. This inaugural convening serves as our official introduction of the ABPC. Although this may be your first introduction to this new initiative, we've been working behind the scenes. Here's a brief summary of what the ABPC has accomplished in 2021. We worked in partnership with the Arkansas Community Foundation on the Building Black Communities Fund. This fund awarded grants up to $25,000 to 40 Black-led or Black-serving nonprofits to support programs and initiatives specifically designed to impact Black people and communities in Pulaski, Saline, Perry, Grant, Faulkner, and Lonoke counties. Financial support was provided by Facebook. In addition to funding, grantees are a part of a special learning cohort offered through Facebook, where they have access to Facebook ad credits and technical support with a Facebook ad specialist. Additionally, the ABPC is currently providing capacity building to nonprofit grantees by offering virtual learning sessions in the areas of marketing and communications, fundraising, grant writing training, financial management, board development, and more. In 2021, the ABPC organized regional listening sessions with Black nonprofit professionals across the state. The purpose of these listening sessions was to deepen our understanding of the challenges and opportunities Black-led or Black-serving nonprofits encounter within the philanthropic sector, identify collective strategies to increase sustained investments in Black communities across Arkansas, and develop strategic partnerships with Black-led or Black-serving nonprofit organizations that can assist with community-based outreach efforts. We are just getting started. Stay tuned for exciting announcements in 2022 in how you can support the mission of the ABPC. Following this short video featuring some of the Building Black Communities Fund grantees, you'll hear from Derek Lewis II as he introduces 2 panels on gaining more through giving back.
Good morning, everybody. Thank y'all so much for joining us again. I want to thank Tamika for that awesome introduction. We will be hearing from Derek Lewis II a little bit later in the program, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started with that first panel. I am so excited about this first panel. Again, I want to reintroduce myself in case you are just tuning in and you didn't have a chance to join us at the very beginning. My name is Keontae, but nobody calls me that. Everybody calls me Key. I am Key Fletcher. I am the director of Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by some of the preeminent thought leaders. Listen, these ladies are the powerhouses when you think about philanthropy. Now, I am a New Orleans, Louisiana girl, and so a lot of references that I say come from where I'm from, which is Louisiana, and so I love the Saints. So to me, they're like the all-star Saints team. And so I'm super excited that they're going to be with us today. They're going to be sharing thoughts. And our particular panel, we're going to be talking about gaining more. Before we go ahead and get started, I do want to give you all some housekeeping rules because I want you all to be with us. Although this is virtual, it's not just me by myself. It's not just you guys by yourself. And it's definitely not just the panel. So I want to give us some housekeeping rules so we can go ahead and get rolling. The very first thing is we want to encourage you to use the event chat function, and that's that little chat bubble that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, this is going to be like our go ahead, Chai, keep it real, or oh, that was great information button. So that's the button to encourage panelists only. So like, wow, that was awesome. That was a great information. Emojis if you have them, whatever you want to give right there. That's to encourage the panelists or even for you all to have conversation. Now that other button that I want you to use is the Q&A button. Now the Q&A button is going to be if you actually have a question that you want to be directed specifically to the panelists. So let's get it right. The event chat button is we're encouraging, we're giving, comments or praises. And then the Q&A button is where you're going to actually leave the information. Now, if you have a question for me or particularly for a panelist by name, like you have a particular question for Dr. Llewellyn Williams, then do that. All right, does that work for everybody? Now we're only going to answer questions in the Q&A. So make sure that the questions are in the Q&A and that the event chat function is where you are hyping everybody up. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we are going to welcome our all-star team, our panelists, our experts. So the thing that I love is I know these ladies are already familiar with each other. They already know each other. So starting first, we are welcoming the lead, Dr. Charlotte Williams. Wow, these are some powerhouses we have today. Miss Susan Taylor Batten, and that is our panel. Did y'all like that theme music? Like I was ready to get up and dance. I was ready to move. Then I was like, oh wait, I'm supposed to be sitting. So thank y'all so much for joining us this morning, ladies. I know that we've got a lot to get into. I am, compared to you all, I'm a baby in the philanthropy world. And so I'm going to be taking notes too, if that's okay. I'm sitting at the table. I'm ready to eat. I've got my detox and cleanse from Thanksgiving. So I'm ready to get filled up with all that y'all have to provide for us today. And so we're so honored that you all are joining us for our convening today. Now, the first thing that we always like to do is we want to know a little bit more about who you are, your space, kind of what led you to where you are in terms of philanthropy, and just kind of sharing a little bit about your experience and your path and the role of philanthropy and the rich legacy of giving in our communities. And so we're going to go ahead and start first with, and I'm going to call you all by your first names, and if that's okay, I think that's okay. We're family here. Y'all know how we do in our community. We family. And we're probably all related somehow, somewhere. I bet all y'all from Arkansas down the line. So we're going to start with Janine, if you'll share a little bit with us and give us a little bit about your path to philanthropy.
Thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to be with you all during this Thanksgiving season. I entered into philanthropy in 1990 with the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. I'm a native Kansan by way of the South. Certainly my grandparents made that great migration North during Jim Crow. And so, the Kauffman Foundation at that time was an operating foundation. I had spent the previous 8 years in the drug and alcohol treatment and then prevention community. That was the first part of my career. So I joined the Kauffman Foundation because they had a drug and alcohol prevention education program. What I didn't know was 3 years later, when Mr. Kauffman would pass, there would be about $800 million coming into the foundation. And suddenly, we had to learn to become grant makers. We traveled all over the country. In fact, that's when I met Susan. I traveled to the Annie E. Casey Foundation to learn about the work that they were doing and met the team there. And we came back to Kansas City and made a decision that we would focus on K through 12, public education, and also community building. I then became the first director of community building. I spent 15 years there and left as the vice president of community and economic development. And then I was recruited to Atlanta in 2005 with the Arthur and Blank Family Foundation. Served for a couple of years and then became the president of a small social justice foundation focused on the rural South of the American South, and then joined SECF, now Philanthropy Southeast, in 2011. But one of the things I do want to say is that during my entire tenure in philanthropy, which is now about 31 years, I would not be able to have survived this experience without the support of the Association of Black Foundation Executives. I mean, it has been there for me through the triumphs and through, quite honestly, some very difficult times that I've had in my career. It is not easy, as you all know, to be in these spaces, but I'm determined to ensure that our people have the opportunity for the deployment of these very limited and precious resources, and it makes it all worth it. So thank you for inviting me today.
Wow, that's such an amazing story. And, when you talked about the unexpected death and having to handle $800 million, it's oftentimes funny. A lot of times I always say that the path chooses us. We don't necessarily choose the path. But it sounds like you've had some amazing support, and I bet, like you said, especially from the rest of the ladies who are on the panel.
Absolutely.
Over 30 years. Wow. I'm already ready to hear from you all. Charlotte, you want to share about your path?
Yes, thank you very much, Key, and hello to my sisters, Janine and Susan. It's very good to be on this panel with both of you. Much love to you and the incredible work that you do. I'm Charlotte Williams. I'm professor and director of the University of Arkansas Clinton School Center on Community Philanthropy. School has been around about 17 years, and I've been a part of the school for 16 of those years. So I'm very grateful to have gotten the opportunity to grow up in philanthropy and academia, which is a very unique intersection, particularly given our focus on racial equity, racial healing, social justice, community philanthropy as a strategy to drive social change. I started my road in philanthropy back in 2007. I did my graduate work at the medical school campus. So I was in a non-traditional graduate school setting, but my focus was community-based participatory research. So I spent a lot of years understanding and researching how community folks, local organizers, grassroots leaders can be engaged in, be a part of improving their own state of health. I'm trained in community-based participatory methodologies. And so around the time when I was finishing up my program was around the time they were developing the Clinton School, and particularly the Center on Community Philanthropy. So my interest and my love for community runs very deep. My father was a Baptist minister, civil rights leader. My mother was a teacher, and they always believed in the power of community. So I'd spent years studying community participation. And so when this position with the Center on Community Philanthropy came around, I was quite frankly, interested in being a researcher as part of the work that they were doing to understand how we test these issues. How do we understand what the hypotheses are around giving and really create the evidence base that this distinct practice of philanthropy works? But long story short, I was invited and recruited to be its director, and I was honored to do so. And as I look back over my journey, community-based participatory research and community philanthropy have a lot of the same identical constructs. They are both focused on utilizing internal assets and focusing on the power that local folks, local populations, local leaders have in improving their philanthropic settings, improving their health. But what we haven't had is a center dedicated to understanding the best practices and the best approaches to it. So I'm excited to be a part of a relatively small group of academic-based philanthropy centers. But the Center on Community Philanthropy is really unique. There's not another like us, either in academia or in philanthropy, because we are dedicated to committed and building on the gifts and the talents of the American South. And so I've been very honored to have a career where I can unashamedly, unapologetically stand for social justice, racial healing, and racial equity, and to move the paradigm around how philanthropy in a very broad way can be part of that journey. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk this morning.
You are speaking my love language. It was later on that I really understood the importance of community and self and organizing, and how empowering people and teaching them for themselves how to organize and how to gain money. We know that a lot of times power comes with money. And so having that equals having power. And so I am so excited. I like in the research aspect that you talked about, the importance of knowing our history of philanthropy and what we've been doing and researching that and studying it and putting it out front for people is really important, especially in our community, because a lot of times the research and documentation isn't necessarily there. And so I know a lot of you ladies have experienced a lot of firsts in terms of philanthropy. So I definitely want to talk about that. But I also want to give Susan the opportunity as well to talk about your path and how you got started in the philanthropy sector as well.
Great. Thank you, Key. Thank you. And Janine and Charlotte, these are the two sisters that I have learned so much from. And I think I'm going to learn so much more about them just being in conversation with the three of you today. But it is great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm calling in from suburban DC. I'm calling from my home in Maryland. And, my path was not a straight one or sort of an intentional path to philanthropy. But whenever I talk about sort of how I got into this work, I have to start by talking about my family, right? So I am the fourth of and the youngest sibling in my family. And my mom and dad were part of what we call the village, right? I grew up in Long Island, New York. And so I know we're going to talk a lot about this, but giving back and supporting each other is who we are as African descendant people. My dad was a public school teacher in Brooklyn, New York for about 40 years and ran youth centers at night. And when he wasn't doing that on the weekends, he was running homework clubs in our basement. My mom was a community health nurse and raised generations, I will say, of families in a town called Wyandanch, New York. But she was also the head of the PTA, the Girl Scout troop leader, the Boy Scout troop leader, you name it. And so just from my, and I know this is a story that we share, from my upbringing, the principles and values of giving back, the notion that we are part of a village is very much sort of, in my DNA, and I know it's in yours as well. My background is social work. I'm actually a social worker by training, and I started my career in public service as a foster care worker in DC government, and was enjoying that. Got tapped by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to go there to manage pretty large national research projects on child nutrition. So studying the impact of the WIC program, the school lunch program, the school breakfast program. And I was pretty much set for a career in public service and was at USDA for about 7 or 8 years when I got tapped by a search firm again to join a intermediary organization that worked with large foundations to help them with evaluation and the like. And I remember the conversation I had with my mom at that time. I was at one of the highest grades before your presidential sort of, selection within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And my mom thought I was crazy because I was going to leave my good government job, right, and go to
Don't
this
you leave that good job.
Don't you? And we didn't, right? We would get those good jobs and go to a sector called philanthropy that I couldn't fully explain what that was, but the sort of the frame that was offered to me about the opportunity to take risks and to use resources, to leverage public resources to get more traction and better outcomes in communities really, really stuck with me. So I made the transition. I went to an organization called the Center for Assessment and Policy Development. They're based in suburban Philly and was there for 5 years. And they actually worked with, as I said, large national foundations doing evaluations of their work. And it's so interesting, Key. I never thought I would go into a foundation because I was learning so much from community, sort of where you were going, Charlotte, about the difficulties often and issues with power imbalance, right, from the community perspective. So I got to know philanthropy and foundations, so to speak, from community perspective and thought I would never go inside of one because of what I was learning. But in 1999, the Annie Casey Foundation was embarking on something that was really innovative. This was a national foundation with a good reputation that was making a 10-year investment in 22 cities around the country to make neighborhoods better places for kids to live. And 10-year investment was innovative back in 1999 for a national foundation to make. The fact that they were going neighborhood-based, and what got me was the sort of principle was that we would take our lead from residents on how to actually do neighborhood change and strengthen communities. So I made the transition in 1999, as Janine said. That's where we met, and I was at Casey for about 9 years. And I would say probably mid-tenure at Casey, it became so clear that that foundation needed additional support and work around dealing with issues of race and racial justice. I linked up with your colleagues, Sharice West-Scantlebury, Corey Anderson, a number of other Black program officers at the Annie Casey Foundation, and were able to get that institution to build a portfolio in 2004 to focus on racial equity and racial justice. And I took that position. And so that was about 4 additional years before the position opened up at ABPC, and I jumped at it. As Charlotte, you said, the opportunity to unapologetically focus on Black people and ways in which to transform this sector so that it is more effective for our community was something I couldn't turn down. And so I've been at ABPC now in the CEO position for 12 years. 12 years.
Listen,
Yeah.
so because it keeps coming up. So a couple things. When you talk about village, like I feel that so deeply because I just listening to you ladies, it is obvious that you care about the work you do, and you cannot do this work, particularly in the segments and areas that you're talking about that we're dealing with, without having a deep desire and love for it, a deep care. And when it's almost like the ancestors are calling us back to our place of where we rightly belong, which is making sure that our communities are properly cared for. And so often that is not happening, and so often it takes us doing it. Now, we know a lot of people, when you talk about foundation, like they get nervous and scared because they don't want to raise money. Like I can remember the first time I had to begin to focus on it. It was nerve-wracking. But one of the things is I found in our community, we're not taught nowadays to talk about money and to ask for what we need and to go after the resources. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about that whole idea of being in a space and and philanthropy that both Susan, you and Charlotte mentioned the whole idea of being unapologetically Black in the space and going after the resources. Can you talk a little bit more, Charlotte, and then Susan, about like what you mean by that and how empowering that is, and how that's helpful to you in your philanthropic space?
Well, you know, from the very beginning of the creation of the Clinton School, we always decided that a focus on philanthropy was going to be important, particularly in the context of global public service. Because if the giving of your resources and your energies and career is how you generically describe public service, then once you add your wealth to that, that takes it to a whole nother level. And also states like Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, which are heavily populated with Black people and considered some of the poorest states in the country, they always rank at or near the top in charitable giving by the Internal Revenue Service. So we knew in the beginning we were going to need an adjective in front of this word philanthropy, so people did not think we were talking about rich people giving to the poor. So this grassroots philanthropy or community philanthropy, which is a term used by the Ford Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, it connotes that giving is a natural part of communal living. And it's a vital but poorly understood aspect of public service. So from the beginning, we decided that a unit dedicated to studying and researching and publishing about it should be a Clinton School priority. So here at the Clinton School, we are studying philanthropy in its broadest, the broadest way as benevolence in a community-centered, consensus-building approach to delivering public service, as giving by joining with other people to improve the common good, as giving by working with others to advance some of the basic humanitarian interests like eliminating poverty, advancing racial equity, racial healing, but to do it through inclusiveness and participatory work. Now, this also reminds me of Ambassador James Joseph, who Susan, we just finished celebrating him in Washington, D.C. He has a book that he authored entitled The Charitable Impulse, Wealth and Social Consciousness in Communities and Outside of the United States. And in his book, Ambassador Joseph says that it is commitment and compassion that continues to be the cornerstone of giving in Black communities. And oftentimes it's the poor giving to the poor, particularly in a time of crises. But a lot of times these groups, they are marginalized and they're outside the mainstream. So a lot of Americans see Black folks as simply the recipients of charity and not the community philanthropists that they really are.
Mhm.
Commitment and compassion. You know, it reminds me, I always say this, but my great grandmama, who did not have a lot, and we all have these stories, right? She would take a dime, a nickel, a quarter, and she would give, right? She would go and not only just in terms of the actual, dollar, but she would care for when the folks were sick in the neighborhood, she would go over, she would take care of them, she would make sure they had something to eat. So again, it goes back to our whole idea, I feel like, of a village, and just as a people, ancestral, it's within our DNA to naturally be givers, to naturally want to give back. I want to go ahead, I want to shift a little bit and ask you, Janine, that we know that you're a longtime advocate for strengthening philanthropy specifically, and Charlotte just talked about, those states of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And so we know that you're really an advocate for that, to helping build an equitable, prosperous South. And a large part of that centers around philanthropy and talking about inequity, particularly caused by racism and present day systemic things that continue to kind of perpetuate that. Can you talk a little bit about the historical context of disenfranchisement and philanthropy? I feel like we've already kind of gotten started in that, but if you want to talk a little bit more about that, and then your work with SECF, and frame that for us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. And Charlotte, just a beautiful segue into some of the things that I wanted to share, because first, as we all know, the United States is a contradiction. And our founding principles in this country embrace the ideals of freedom and equality, but our nation is built on, quite honestly, the sweat, blood, and tears of our people, and built on the systemic exclusion and suppression of communities of color. And we see this, as Charlotte and Susan have already pointed out, often in terms of how we're forgotten in the Black community in conversations about donors and giving. And we in this country have neglected to uproot entrenched structural racism, and we have distorted democracy in the concentration of power and influence. So for African Americans, philanthropy has been deeply embedded. We all know this. Susan described her family. I certainly have my family's story. Charlotte, I know you have yours as well. And in spite of the unfulfilled promise of Reconstruction, the opportunities that have been denied Black folks, property ownership, education, political participation, and certainly protection from white national terrorists, all of which was designed to trap our communities into second-class citizenship. In spite of that, as Charlotte pointed out, she talked about commitment and compassion. I'm going to talk about passion and sacrifice, have been a very important part of our philanthropy, and it's often connected to our life experiences. And so I believe in philanthropy that we're in the midst of a cultural shift, and that organized philanthropy, which we're all deeply a part of, but I believe that organized philanthropy is essentially stuck in the past. And we're not good, and we're not doing a good job of engaging BIPOC communities in organized philanthropy. We're often not even asking them to give, and yet we know that 1 in 5 African Americans say that they would support more organizations if they were just asked. Obviously, slavery and Jim Crow impacted our families' ability to accumulate wealth, and that put us centuries behind white folks. But regardless of not having that wealth, we give at higher rates outside of traditional philanthropy. You heard some of the data that Charlotte spoke about. And in a recent diversity giving study, it found that 2/3 of Black families make charitable donations of $11 billion a year. That's significant, hugely significant. And as we all know, our folks are giving upwards of 13% of their incomes to places of worship. That's also hugely significant. Our giving is rooted in the motherland, and it's found in pre-colonial West African traditions of giving and sharing. And our giving requires a broader and a more inclusive definition of philanthropy than we've been operating with. We have in our community a sense of obligation to family and to community, which is foundational to who we are as a people.
Janine, there's one thing that I kind of want to unpack and talk with Susan a little bit about what you just said, and that whole idea of organized philanthropy has been left in the past. And so, now there's accessibility to be able to give to so many different organizations and entities. And so I am really excited about ABPC being formed in Arkansas for an opportunity for people to be able to give. One of the things we do know is that, again, there is power in being organized. We know that, right? We know that through the history of our people, even down to the civil rights movement, right? Being organized, having an organized group of people after a particular thing, it pushes whatever you're working towards forward. But what's so interesting in our community oftentimes is, even though we have a position of power, we don't often stand on it, or we don't see, or sometimes we don't, I don't think, recognize it. We give to a lot of organizations and to a lot of entities. And for some of us, if we had not given historically, it would not have been possible. The churches would have not been there. The HBCUs would not have been there. The schools would have not been there if we had not given. And so we know, as you ladies just so eloquently put, we've always been givers. It goes back to who we are. Susan, I want to ask you the question, how can we kind of shift this? If we have historically been givers, but we have not been seen in that light, or we have not seen ourselves in that light, how do we begin this shift? How do we change that narrative so that we see ourselves as givers, and so that others begin to see us as givers, particularly to our community? And then how do we shift the narrative and move our people back to giving and to organize giving so that they see the impact in that?
Yeah, Janine hit on so much of what I think, I know we all think as well. I struggle with the term philanthropy and fitting it within our community, because it does, to your point, Key, have a meaning and a narrative behind it in this country that is, sort of aligned with charity and rich white people. I'm just going to say it that way. And so while we've always been givers, I have to say I often struggle with whether or not we should use terms, right, to fit who we are and our community. But nonetheless, I think it's all about education. Just telling our story and taking control of the narrative. As you say, Black people are some of the largest givers in the world, and not just the United States, but in the world. We just don't call it philanthropy. We call it tithing. Janine, you mentioned in the church, we call it membership fees, right? Our Black civic philanthropic fraternities and sororities. There is a infrastructure of Black philanthropy in this country that does need to be better organized, to your point, Keith. But I think it's really about telling the stories. I would seriously encourage you all, if you do not know Valeda Fullwood, sister out of Charlotte, North Carolina, to get to know her. She wrote a book, she released a book several years ago, giving back, a tribute to generations of African Americans and philanthropists. But she also created a exhibit called The Soul of Philanthropy that travels around the country. Yeah, if you've seen that.
Yes,
And
I want it here. I want it here.
I know. I think it should be in every community, in this country. I got to speak at one in Cleveland, also in Charlotte when the Soul of Philanthropy was there. And that's the opportunity for philanthropists, Black philanthropists, to come and tell their stories and to gain that sort of recognition about who we are and our history of giving. I also, for us, I've been using and leaning on African language and words to describe who we are at ADFI, right? So our annual conference is titled Harambe. It's not just because it's cool. We do that on purpose to demonstrate the connection to African principles, which means it's a Kenyan term, all pulled together, right? Our CEO network that we organize every month is called the Umoja Circle. Again, connecting it just, mentally for folks that these are African principles and traditions that live in our community. I think that's a part of the education as well, the way in which we're using sort of African language and the like. The Umoja Circle, of course, Umoja meaning unity. So we know we have always been about collective responsibility and self-help, right? Those are strong values in our community. To your point, that's how we have survived. Our institutions have helped us survive, the racism and the anti-Black racism in this country. So I just point to education, of just getting our stories out there. And I want to go back to something that you raised, a question earlier about why unapologetically Black and sort of what that does. And we get pushback. I know many folks get pushback within the philanthropy sector about why you're focusing on Black people and not other people of color, right? We know that argument is always out there. Anti-Black racism is a real thing. It is global, right? And we say that all people of color suffer from some form of racism in this country. But the way I describe it is that the structure of racism in the United States was built on the backs of Black people, right? When you trace our history, right? From enslavement to sharecropping to Jim Crow to segregation to mass incarceration today, right? And on, police shootings, So there is a need to really focus on the unique experiences and circumstances of Black people, as well as the unique circumstances of Latinos, Native Americans, and Asian Americans. And then do broader sort of coalition work, of course. But if we want to address anti-Black racism and how it impacts us as a community, we have to be intentional and go right at it. Go right at it.
Susan, so y'all are giving me so much. So that the question I ask is kind of how we can shift the narrative, and Susan talked about education. One of the things I love that you said, not only educating us, but educating us in the historical perspective of who we have always been, and using and identifying ourselves through our history. And so using our terms, right? Using things that are familiar to us, using things that are unique to us, and connecting with the community. I absolutely love that, because so often, we kind of want to shift and do what everybody else is doing, and we have lost so much of who we are as a people. So I love the idea of going back to using some of the from the words to our community, but to making sure that we don't forget who we are as a people. Because I'm gonna be real with y'all. I didn't know even I probably have to look a couple times to make sure I spell philanthropy right. So even to say philanthropic, philanthropist, like I never use that when I'm talking to people, because a lot of times they don't know what I'm talking about. And these are educated people, but when you say, the building fund, there's some dues that do, they need that. So there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with being honest, but there's nothing wrong in having pride in who we are as a people and defining ourselves and our spaces for ourselves and making sure that we're doing it. So I love what you said about that, and I love the whole idea of collective work. We've always been about that. I want to get that exhibit, y'all. I'm excited. We hopefully within the next couple years we'll have the Soul of Philanthropy here in Arkansas. We do have a question from one of our folks that are actually listening to us, and the question is, what are your top 3 components that are vital to attract consistent funding outside of a special fund for your organization? Oh, that's a good question. So what are your top 3 components that are vital to attract consistent funding? So not just the one-time giving, but what do you do to make sure that people are consistently giving to your organizations? And let's go ahead. Anybody jump in?
I'll jump in. What comes to mind first for the key is relationships. I always say people give money to people who they know. And so, intentionally building relationships with donors, with foundation staff, I think is something that is critically important to sustain funding over time. Yeah.
And I'll add one. I would say, for us, we also get a lot of sponsorships consistently. And one of the things about that is identifying potential partners where there's some kind of self-interest, right? I mean, they have an interest in having connections with our members, and we have an interest in ensuring that our members are getting good support, education, services. And so building relationships with partners that are high quality partners that really understand the kind of relationships that we want them to engage in with our members has really been key as well.
And I'll just add that, here we define community philanthropy as the giving of time, talent, and treasure. But when you invested locally, it's characteristic of positive change and lasting development. It's a practice that helps people understand the power of what they already giving publicly, privately, to the church, to the school, and then to envision a future that comes from sustaining those assets. So as an initial thing, we promote that things of value exist in a lot of different forms. Money is one of them, but things of value exist in a lot of different forms, especially at the population level. I think at this point, we all can see that you can't just throw money at anything and really fix it. So what we've done over the years is to connect the mission of the center's work and the importance of building sustainability locally to the work of our funders and our other partners. Because I think at the end of the day, whether it's if you have just grant monies without a local process on the ground with local people committed and engaged and involved in sustaining that philanthropy, you really don't have long-term change. And so that's for us has really been how we've led connecting with our partners and our funders around this issue of mission and sustainability.
It sounds like what y'all are saying to me is kind of all centered around relationship. It's funny. There's a lot of people I've met with, and it's not even to ask for anything. It's just to get to know them and build relationship. And I can't tell you how many times they then want to give something just because we sat down and we talked and there was a connection, a commonality that we found amongst each other in the work that we're doing. And so then we began to brainstorm ways that could help, but it wasn't even for that. It was to truly build relationship. And so I agree with everything that you ladies are saying. I often know that people will give to what they care about. People give and take care of things they care about. So we first have to build those relationships, and then it'll be long-term giving. Oh man, I gotta go. I'm so sad. We gotta wrap it. And so I'm going to give all of you ladies, if there's any final words of wisdom or anything that you want to share with our attendees today, you have the floor. So I'm going to start with Janine.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate having a chance to be with my sisters today, Charlotte and Susan. I want to say and reiterate what Susan said about Valeda Fullwood and her book, Giving Back. And in her book, she says, we have always been philanthropists. Philanthropy in our communities has been involved in, as Charlotte said, giving time, money, and moral concern to benefit other people. It's how we care about one another. And so out of necessity, we've used philanthropy to uplift our communities, to tackle racism, to tackle economic disparities and human suffering. And we need to claim it. And we need to move past traditional views of what constitutes philanthropy. I appreciate being with you today.
Thank you, Janine. Charlotte?
I think I would just encourage the Arkansas Blacks in Philanthropy Collaborative to be as broad and as wide-minded as possible when you think about philanthropic practice and engaging in philanthropy moving forward, because it really is an engine that is undertapped, that's understudied, and in some cases unstudied, especially in the context of Black communities. We know that there's a wealth power there. And so I'm just excited to have been a part of this panel, and even more excited to be a partner with the organization. ABPC is one of the newest innovations in philanthropy for the region. So we support the work, and I encourage you to continue the work in partnership moving forward in solidarity.
Thank you, Charlotte. And last but certainly not least, Susan.
Yeah, no, again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you. I'm so excited about what's happening in Arkansas. I'm so excited about this, y'all. I was like, kind of like come through Little Rock. I mean, this is
right.
I would just remind you that you are a part of a national movement. And, the opportunities that you have to talk with, dialogue, strategize with similar groups in Charlotte, in Cleveland, Ohio, in Kansas City, in Seattle, Washington. There are similar collaboratives, Black collaboratives around the country. And I just encourage you to, as you do your deep work in Arkansas, connect with your colleagues across the country, because this is a national movement, and we need every single one of us to be organized and pulling in the right direction. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you all for allowing me to moderate this amazing panel today. I'm going to echo what Susan said, and just remembering that there's something larger, bigger, and greater at play. And we are standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, and we've always been givers. And now is our time to take back what is rightfully ours, to be unapologetic about it, and go after the resources, not only for ourselves, but the wise man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Let's go after what our greats didn't get, and let's make sure that our children's children have what is rightfully theirs. Thank y'all so much for being with us in this amazing space. Thank you for joining us today. Don't y'all go nowhere. That's my deep South talking. We're going to return momentarily after a short break. Thank you, ladies. sprinkler. Were y'all jamming with me? Thank y'all so much for being with us for our ABPC convening on today. My name is Key Fletcher. I'm so happy to be with y'all. So we are gonna bring up our next panel. And I want to do a few just housekeeping rules because I know there's some people who did not get a chance to catch us at the very beginning. And so I want to make sure that we've got all of our housekeeping rules in play before we go ahead and get started with our next panel. So number one, we want to make sure that you are commenting and that we're grabbing those comments, and we want to know what you're thinking. And so there is an event chat function, and it is located, a little chat bubble located on the right side of your screen. That is to encourage panelists. So if you want to say, great job, I love what you're saying, I agree with it, right on, that is what that's for. Then there's also the Q&A function as well. The Q&A function is where you can drop any questions that you have, and we'll try to make sure that we get those in and ask those to the panelists. Please only drop questions in the Q&A and not in the event chat function. So again, make sure any questions that you have, please be specific. If you have something that's for a particular panelist, make sure you say their name. If it's just general, it doesn't matter who answers it. Make sure you do that in the Q&A. If you drop it in the event chat, we're probably not going to answer it in the event chat. That is just for praise and for saying great job. So again, Q&A, any particular questions, it is definitely communication back and forth. So we want to hear from you guys, and we want to make sure that we get your questions answered. All right, we good to go? All right, so we are going to kick it back off with our next panel. And we have got somebody who is what I consider one of the experts when it comes to philanthropy and really working in Black spaces. And we have with us Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones is going to be kicking off this session that takes a look at the current landscape of Black philanthropy and asks what the future of giving looks like for Black communities. Dr. Jones is an associate professor of political science at Clark Atlanta University and a consultant for the Medgar and Myrtle Evers Institute in Jackson, Mississippi. It's a great organization. And so I would like to introduce Dr. Jones, and Dr. Jones has an amazing panel, an amazing lineup today with him as well. And so again, like y'all, ABPC has done such an amazing job of making sure that we have the best, the brightest, the finest when it comes to panelists today. So make sure you get those questions in. We have Dr. Joyvin Benson right here from Arkansas. We have Tyrone Spans, Indiana Program Officer, All-Star. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Erica Wright, VP.
Hello, how's everybody? I hope everybody is well. My name is Dr. Joseph L. Jones. Thank you, Key, for that very interesting and very provocative introduction. I have an impossible task this morning of actually managing and following the energy of Key, because she set the tone for this conversation. And so I'm really, really excited about engaging these wonderful and brilliant panelists around a topic or an issue about the happenings of what's going on right now. And so just to try to go back over again, I want to introduce Ms. Erica Wright, Vice President of Global Philanthropy at JP Morgan Chase & Company, Mr. Tyrone Span, Program Officer of Indiana Asset Funders Network and the past Vice Chairman for the Indiana Blacks in Philanthropy, and then last but not least, Dr. Joyvin Benton, Senior Gifts Officer at the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. Let's just get right into it, because I know we have a very limited amount of time, but today we're talking about the current landscape of Black philanthropy and examining what the future of giving looks like in Black communities. But before we actually take a deep dive, we want to do the exact same thing we did in the last panel, which did, I think, a wonderful job of talking about the history of Black philanthropy and the various ways through which Black people give, and so now we're going to build on that and talk about the now. But before we do that, I want to hear from each one of you, and I want you for maybe a minute or two to talk about your own kind of philanthropic sojourn or your journey. So I want to start with Erica. If you could talk to us about how you got into philanthropy.
Thanks, Dr. Jones. So I want to start by just saying how incredibly honored I am to be participating in this conversation and energized and motivated by the last discussion. I think they also gave me a bit of clarity on my path and journey to philanthropy. I would have said, 10 minutes ago, well, an hour ago, I would have said, oh, I've been in it for 6 years. But the reality is, I actually went to college in Baltimore. I went to Morgan State University. And while I was there, started volunteering with Casey Family Services. And after I graduated, ended up working as an intern with the Annie Casey Foundation. And I started in 2005, so right in the midst of their journey around racial equity, and was incredibly inspired by that work. Was also at the time watching Johns Hopkins expand its campus into Black neighborhoods and watching the displacement that was happening in Black communities. And as a communications intern, felt incredibly disconnected and too far away from what was actually happening to people every day. And so decided actually to, I moved overseas. I pursued a master's degree in social work. So my background actually is in social work in youth development and workforce development. And I worked for city government before joining JP Morgan Chase, and I worked in violence prevention. So prior to joining JP Morgan Chase, I was on the other end of phone calls of young Black men being killed. And I got pregnant with a young Black male. And that reality, I think, drove me to think about what are the ways that I can affect systems level change. I can push not only the public, but also the private sector to think differently about how they invest in communities. And the opportunity came to join JP Morgan Chase at what ultimately ended up being a very pivotal time and moment. So that was my journey. And I'll stop there because I think where it has led us will come up a bit later.
Thank you so much, Erica. What a powerful and insightful story. And I'm sure we'll get a little bit more into that in a moment. Tyrone, I want you to tell us your philanthropy story, your sojourn into this work.
Absolutely. I had a very interesting path into this. Not unlike a lot of people, I kind of fell into the field of philanthropy. I actually studied architecture in undergrad and received an MBA in real estate finance in graduate school. So my goal was to actually become a civil planner, urban planner. I wanted to create and mold cities. But as it turned out, when I decided to come back to my hometown, East Chicago, Indiana, they just started a new foundation, and it just so happened that the city planner that I worked under as intern was named the executive director for the new foundation. So it's like, hey, we would love. I love working with you. We know you want to come in. We really need a program officer because they were just starting out, and we're like, well, I could pay you more than the city can. So of course, as a broke college student, I was like, well, sure. I don't know what this philanthropy stuff is, but hey, we'll work it out. And that's how and that's how a lot of us find ourselves into it. We kind of get guided into it from the outside thing, and I winged it for about 6-7 years, just kind of doing what I knew to be best, and then got really involved with AFB. And really started to understand because I started going to all these conferences and I started seeing all these Black people always going into a different room. When other conferences were coming on, I said, well, I'll kind of find out what's going on over here. So I just started following, the crowd going in. And then when I started to get more involved and more engaged with AFB and actually becoming a fellow, it really started to click with me as regards to saying, okay, so this is what philanthropy looks like, what it should look like, particularly from being a Black male in a position of a gatekeeper. And through that, so after 18 years in that space, I was able to really understand what that situation meant. And I felt that at that point, I really wanted to have even a better understanding if I really want to make this a long-term career, my long-term passion. So I decided to go off and start to work for a not-for-profit for a couple of years, just so I could see the other side of it. Because I've always been on the giving side, but I wanted to get that understanding in regards to what it meant to really be in the ground floor of the grassroots organization. So I got that perspective, and by getting that perspective, it helped me to become better understanding of the needs, not only of our community, but for those organizations that serve our community. It's very easy to look at it from a funder's perspective in regards to what's going on. But when you have that perspective of being on the asking side instead of the giving side, it really starts to mesh those things together. So after working in that field for a couple of years, I decided that I wanted to re-enter the philanthropy field and really be a change agent and a voice for my community in this space. So roundabout, that's kind of how I kind of fell into it. The typical story, the typical story about how everybody goes into this field. So
Of course. Start off on one path, lead to another, city planner, program
absolutely,
officer, like that's the path.
everybody's story, right?
Everybody's story, right? So Joyvan, tell us your story.
Yeah, and Tyrone, I'm glad that you actually took time to go back on see what it's like on the asking side. As professionally, I've always, kind of been on the asking side, but personally, I think I'm just a natural giver. I think it's something that I've always, as a Black person growing up, Black community, Black family, I've always seen my family members giving and coming together to help the family members and community, not just to survive, but thrive. And so I think that comes naturally. But for me, I think as far as being in the fundraising space, it's something, that I've done for a long time, not even recognizing. I started working at an academic enrichment program, the W.E.B. Du Bois Scholars Institute at Princeton. And I was writing grants and working with program officers and foundations and even working with corporations, but not realizing, that this was fundraising, just that's something that was a part of my job. And I was just out there making it happen. And, I left that and I went back to graduate school to pursue a PhD, because I was really interested in systems change and understanding the interactions among race, gender, class, and then just really diving deeper into understanding disparities and inequities. And, I left and I started working in academia for a while, but I eventually ended up working at a grassroots nonprofit where I was able to really dig a little bit deeper into my academic background, but raise money for an organization that focused on things that I studied, which was really great. So I was studying health interactions among health, environment, and education. And so this nonprofit that I worked for was actually working on policy issues around those areas. So as a fundraiser, this was perfect for me because I had knowledge in the background and I could go out and talk to people about why it's important to invest in these things and why it's important to invest in creating some policy shifts. So it was just a great opportunity for me and something that I never thought I would do, be in fundraising and development. But as I got in it and been in there a little longer, I realized that it's just a great space. I always look at it as a way for me to help people connect their passions and their interests to the needs of an organization or institution, helping people be able to create the change that they want to see. A lot of times people, they want to do something, they want to be able to help, they don't know how. And sometimes people have money and assets, but they don't know how to use that for good. And for me, I'm able to connect them to opportunities for them to do that so they can be the change that they want to see in the world. And it's such a great space to be in and a wonderful opportunity for a lot of people. So that's kind of my story, jumping in and being able to really kind of just help create changes. Right now people are really focused on building equitable spaces. And I feel like as a fundraiser, I'm in a perfect space to be able to guide folks on how to do that.
So let's talk about this current space and almost the elephant in the room for these past couple of years, right? Just put it in the context, right? I mean, it was mentioned in the last panel that, we saw some horrific things in 2020, right? The killing of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, and of course, George Jackson. And each one of these individuals' lives had, in many ways, propelled people to the streets. I mean, across racial, ethnic lines. And there was some demand for change. And following that, you began to start to see some traction in the philanthropic world and also in the corporate world around, okay, what can we do to actually, usher in some type of equity, some type of justice in our respective spaces. So Tyrone, I want to start with you. And I want you to talk to us a little bit about how those moments actually changed philanthropy, or did it change philanthropy? Are program officers changing the way and more intentionally focusing on, pouring resources into Black communities? Talk to us a little bit about what you've seen in this post George Floyd world.
Yes, no, I think it definitely has started to make a change, because what the biggest change that I've seen is that there's a more of a willingness for traditional philanthropy to have real conversations and real dialogue and real communication with nonprofit organizations that are on the ground doing the work. That was not necessarily the case even 2 years ago, as you were saying. But with the realization that the way we were doing things in the past was not working, and that we need to change and we need to do something differently, I think has opened up doors and built some bridges that weren't there before, and people didn't realize that were there. And I think one of the key things in that is that some of the things that I've seen over my 20 plus years in the field is that there's more people who look like us. There's more Black men and women in the actual positions of policy and decision making within these philanthropic organizations and these funding institutions, so that when these topics come up, they don't fall on deaf ears. There's some of us are in the room actually having these conversations and being able to articulate that, and also being able to go to the leaders of these nonprofit organizations and have communications and really be able to talk about it. In the past panel, there was the talk about what is philanthropy. A lot of times our community doesn't really understand what philanthropy is. Well, the more that people who look like you and me are in the room where the decisions are being made and can actually take those conversations to the community and help educate our leaders of our Black-led organizations and initiatives that says, this is what philanthropy looks like. This is what is that you need to do to have real dialogue and have those communications with that. It is a long-term benefit for that. So therefore, this movement that's happening now will be able to live on past, its expiration date, because there's people in place that can continue on the conversation when it's not front page news anymore, and can help to educate our community in regards to what's happening with regards to that. And that, to me, I think has been the biggest change, because I'm seeing now collaborations and initiatives and investments in our nonprofit organizations, in our communities, that has never happened before. And the ability for our leaders to actually take this moment and really get the resources that's necessary for them to build the capacity for the organizations, so that they can continue on past this moment and get ready for the next thing that's coming up.
So Tyrone just spoke to us about from a philanthropic standpoint, like a program officer looking at it from 20 years plus up into this moment. Erica, I want you to kind of jump in and talk about it from a corporate standpoint, about how you in a corporate space saw things change, even in JP Morgan, or just in the corporate field itself. Just talk to us a little bit about if you think this is a kind of a permanent change, and just kind of walk us through what you were seeing, these past 2 years.
So I think it's important to note, right, that I sit in a unique seat, sitting inside of corporate responsibility and inside of corporate philanthropy. And, I'm glad I had a moment to chat with Tyrone ahead of the discussion, because I think I can underscore his point about having Black and brown faces inside of these conversations, sitting at the table inside of these conversations. And I'll say, there have been significant changes over the last 2 years. But with regard to JP Morgan Chase, I do think it's important for me to note that there were a number of Black and Brown voices that have been talking about this for decades, right, inside of the organization. I'm based in New Orleans. You cannot walk into a branch without seeing Black and Brown tellers. They are branch managers. They are inside of corporate responsibility. They are inside every line of business. And so when the past 2 years events took place, there was already a significant amount of momentum and agitation and discussion already happening inside of the firm, but then also underneath the corporate responsibility umbrella. And I have had the opportunity to watch the evolution over the last 6 years that I've been with the firm from kind of a broader economic prosperity lens to a very focused, inclusive economy lens, and recognizing that this isn't just a moral imperative, this is also a business imperative, right? So if we are going to be strong, the communities we live in, the communities we work in, they must be strong as well. The last 2 years have enabled us to speak very explicit about Black communities and have enabled us to say we are going to be laser focused on investing in Black communities. And I hope you all have seen that JP Morgan Chase made a $30 billion commitment last year to investing in Black communities. And I think probably the most important part of that investment is the fact that 28 billion of the 30 billion is not in philanthropy, is actually through the business. 2 billion is also through philanthropy, and I think to the earlier points around how we are thinking about where we invest, so ensuring we are investing in leaders who are most proximate to their communities and to the challenges that we're addressing. So very consciously looking for Black and Brown leaders who are serving Black and Brown communities, how we bring those efforts to scale. Those are all critical parts of our philanthropic strategy, but that 28 billion is focused on how do we help Black people become homeowners? How do we help them refinance their existing homes and save them? How do we save affordable housing? How do we invest in small businesses, which we know is a huge driver of Black wealth? How are we thinking about changing, adapting, shifting, restructuring financial products to better support the financial health of Black communities? I am sitting today in a community branch. So how are we thinking about even rebuilding trust? And to that earlier point, relationships in Black communities. So how are we opening doors and saying, we've got a lot of work to do and we want to do it together. And like I said, as I'm sitting here, how are we also thinking about hiring and centering our Black employees and thinking about like the future changes that need to happen? And so it is like I'm sure most Black program officers have experienced. It is a journey, right? It is not a light switch that flips on and off. But I think there is very real acknowledgement that we can only go so far without actually tackling some of these very serious disparities, and the racial wealth gap is top on that list.
Thank you so much, Erica. So we've heard from Tyrone from the program officer standpoint. Erica just gave us a glimpse of the landscape in regards to corporate philanthropy in this moment. So Joyven, you work at a Black college, a Black university, right?
Yes.
Probably one of the most neglected institutions in the history of this country.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So talk to us a little bit about how this moment and being on the receiving end
Yes.
of this benevolence. And more specifically, I know that Jay-Z and Beyonce gave UAPB $400,000 for scholarships. And talk to us a little bit about, at least from your standpoint, how you're seeing things change, at the very least, from somebody who's asking for money to actually help Black communities.
Yes, yeah. And definitely, that point about HBCUs being historically neglected, at the state and federal level. It's just, paramount and has had just a huge effect on how we are able to operate as far as building our endowments and having those funds to create academic programs and buildings. And, so that is a point that we should never forget. But at this moment in time, people are really looking at HBCUs. Historically, again, HBCUs have been one of the biggest factors in contributing to building middle class, the Black middle class, and people, our entrepreneurs, our teachers, our educators, our engineers. A lot of them have come from HBCUs through the generations. And so, unfortunately, though, we still see such huge wealth gaps in our country and in society, even with college graduates. And one of the issues is that so many Black students leave school with such high rates of debt, and that can create all kind of barriers. And your credit scores and being able to buy a house, just trying to build your future and your life. And so these funds we're seeing now, specifically like the ones we got from Beyonce and Jay-Z, $400,000 over 4 years, is significant because it is helping us reduce student debt. This is such a big moment for us. And one of the visions that I have at UAPB specifically is for all of our students who are coming here, who are working hard and thriving and showing up, is that we want them to be able to leave school without debt, without a lot of debt. And to do that, we have to have these scholarship funds that come in. And so we are so grateful for this because the one thing about the Beyonce and Jay-Z scholarship is that it went towards arts, history, and communications. And we all know that those fields are definitely hard to get in career-wise, to make money on. And oftentimes, a lot of times we steer our students away from those fields because we know how difficult it is to kind of build a career trajectory. And for them to get these scholarship dollars, they can focus on building their portfolios, focus on their craft and their art form. And so we're excited. Our students were extremely excited about that. And we are also getting other dollars to create opportunities to reduce student debt. But the important thing for me is to be able to leverage those funds so we can think long-term and strategically, not just about scholarship, but how do we build our endowment? And this is what other institutions are thinking about, building those endowments. These are funds that we can use so we can invest in our academics, so we can build buildings and upgrade our technology. For instance, in the state of Arkansas, we do not get money, state dollars, to maintain buildings. You can maybe get funding to build a new building, even though that's very difficult to do. However, you can sometimes you can't get any kind of money to maintain a building. And so how are we leveraging this to say we have money, scholarship money? Let's think long term about building our endowment so we can increase our resources to make sure that our students have an incredible academic environment, research, top-notch buildings, top-notch faculty and facilities. And so that's, hopefully how we'll be able to really educate people about how to think long-term and what we need as we're moving forward towards the future.
So, we just heard from three different perspectives from three different industries, but, it all kind of begs the question, right? Is this a movement or is this a moment, right? And we have to seriously wrestle with that. But what I've heard from Erica and Tyrone, and I want you all to speak to this very quickly because we have just a few minutes left, is the importance of having Black people in those spaces. Because if there are Black people in those spaces, they can continue the conversation. As Erica talked about, they were already having these conversations, for years. And so when the moment came, you were able to actually, execute what you've already been talking about. But, are we in a moment or just a movement? I mean, is there any kind of sustainability to this, what we saw? And anyone can jump in and attempt to.
Can I jump in there?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to say, this is definitely a movement, and we all know, and this is why I always talk about thinking long-term and strategically, because anytime there's a movement, there's going to be pushback, right? And we've already started seeing some pushback here in Arkansas. Like the legislature passed a bill that said that, you can't designate funds just for, to say, minority students or Black students, right? And so this, this is already, we're seeing this, and being able to really step up in that moment and understand, for us as a HBCU, we can take that and steer it in a way like we're a Black organization. Our students are, about at least 90% Black. So if someone wants to give a gift and they want it to go towards Black students, then, the place to go is probably an HBCU. But for students, for people who are wanting to give to other organization institutions here in Arkansas, public institutions, they will have to think differently about, how do I go about that? Who do I work with to make sure that me as the donor, my funds are being used as the way that I want. But I think this is just a great moment for us to be able to really come together and say, you know what, we're going to continue to give money that invest in our organizations, invest in our institutions. This is a way for us to be able to create real systemic change and be able to build on the things that our communities have done for generations. And I think education, a lot of people don't know different legislation that's been passed or ways to give and how to give. I think we will be able to really take a moment, for me, and start educating our friends and family on how to do this and why, the language, because it's not something new for us. We've been doing it for years and for generations. And so I just wanted to throw that in about, when there's a movement, there's always going to be pushback. And so we always have to make sure that we're ready to do and to navigate that however we have to.
And also, to piggyback off of that, I think that this has really given an opportunity to raise the awareness of what philanthropy is and what it is not. The conversation has always been, it's like, well, the concept or the thought of philanthropy isn't necessarily something that's spoken about in our communities. But with everything that's been going on, and with the increase of the number of individuals who are in the field that can talk about what it is and explain to their families and friends what this is, what I've been starting to see, and just to piggyback off her point, there's more of a bigger movement for us as individuals and as groups to pool our dollars to do our own philanthropy and not rely on traditional institutions to support our institutions and our agencies. We're taking our dollars, we're pooling our dollars together, giving circles through African American Black-led funds, and really pushing the envelope and saying, it says, well, if the traditional philanthropy is not going to catch up as fast as we need it, we'll do it ourselves. And really start to take the education and the awareness of what philanthropy can do to push the envelope. And starting these funds and a lot of these community foundations that says, okay, we're going to raise dollars, you're going to manage it for us, but we're going to dictate how this thing is going, so that they're pushing the envelope within a lot of these smaller and local community foundations to really push the issue of, we need to support our own, and this is where the dollars needs to go, and this is the reason why. Because again, as we are the quote unquote gatekeepers, it's our responsibility from the philanthropic community to really help to not only educate our community, but educate the people who are making decisions about why these dollars are necessary and where they need to go. So that's where I really see happening.
So we are about to wrap up. I want everybody about 30 seconds to give us any final closing thoughts, and I'll start with Erica and then go with Joyvin and Tyrone, and then I end it up. Erica?
So I'll just use my closing thoughts to speak to the moment versus movement. Like, I really appreciate Joyvin putting a flag in the ground around movement. I was gonna go in with, I don't know, right? But I think what you've said is that's up to us, right? We are going to decide whether or not this is a moment or a movement. And I think part of that is, are we able, in the spaces that are necessary, to institutionalize what we have said must be change, right? And I think, for me, as I think about the limitations and the power of philanthropy, for me, traditional philanthropy is a tool to move bigger systems. It is risk capital. It is proof of concept, proof of point capital, so that we can say, the public sector, the private sector needs to think differently about how they invest in these groups and in these communities. And philanthropy can be that tool or that mechanism. It is not necessarily the end. Now, that beautiful definition that the previous panel outlined in terms of community giving, I think that is forever, right? And so I would love to see, that this be a movement among institutions to think differently about how they respond to support, address Black communities. But I also think we have to be very intentional about ensuring that we are demanding that happens at an institutional level, that these changes, that voices continue to sit at those tables to ensure that.
Beautifully said, Erica. We're running out of time, folks.
Can I just say something?
Get 10 seconds.
All right, I want to lead this FUBU, for us, by us. We are the ones who are leading this. When you give, you use your voice, and you are leveraging a way to create systemic change. So don't forget that.
10 seconds, Tyrone.
No, that's it. It says we need the institutions to push from top down, but we as a community need to push it from the bottom up so we can squeeze it and then meet in the middle and then really make systemic change.
Thank you so much for you wonderful panelists, Tyrone, Erica, Joyvan. It's been a pleasure having this conversation. And I pass it over to Mr. Lewis, Derek Lewis II. Thank you so much.
Once again, I am Key Fletcher, Director of Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, and I am joined by the chair of ABPC, Derek Lewis II. We're going to talk about what's happened in the convening, but listen, I just got to say, I am full. Like, I am overflowing with all of the great resources and information that happened today. I feel so blessed to be a part of this amazing initiative that we're kicking off with ABPC. And just this important work that you're doing for Arkansas, that ABPC is doing for Arkansas.
First, let me echo the panels today, which is absolutely awesome.
Amazing! They crushed it!
Feels like Thanksgiving all over. Your energy. All our panelists, several are my mentors, and just to be able to be in this type of platform with them was just completely awesome.
Without a doubt, this work has been ignored for a very long time by a lot of people, and to see ABPC leading the way for Arkansas and doing this is momentous. It's just a great way to start Giving Tuesday. But I know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. So share with us, what does ABPC have planned coming up for 2022?
First of all, I have these cute cards that Adina made for me that I'm going to probably mess up on.
Get every word right. Okay.
Get every word right. But I wanted to just read this summary quote that, as I was listening to the panelists, that really shares the body of the work that I think will, and I'll go into some points, but ABPC has to be be unapologetic about empowering Black folks and communities of color to give time, talent, and treasure to organize intention in an intentional way that we apply the spirit of loving humanity, which is the soul of philanthropy. We have to be very intentional. We have to be very organized in our efforts as we lift up Black folks and Black communities, particularly those that are leading and serving Black communities.
I can already tell, if y'all can't already, just by the foundation has been laid. People are watching today, but similar to what Tamika said and what was said before, like, this has been a foundation. This is seed that has been planted, soil that has been tilled, and we know we're going to reap a great harvest for Arkansas, right?
Absolutely.
All right,
absolutely.
So share with us some of the things that we can expect to see from ABPC coming up.
Yeah, so there are a number of things that we're going to be doing, but the start out the gate, things that we've done this year, continue to do that, and capacity building for grassroots nonprofits is going to be a major work that we'll be doing. We want to make sure that we're supporting those Black-led and Black-serving organizations and supporting their work because it's important because they're on the ground. They see what other folks can't see. They're handling what other folks won't handle. And so we got to make sure that they have the capacity building. And that'll be done through a number of ways.
You know, when you say capacity building, we heard that several times on our panels today. A lot of times we have really small nonprofits that are working the soil by themselves. They're working the ground. It's good fertile soil, but they don't necessarily have all the resources they need to scale, to grow, and to increase. So the whole idea of ABPC being able to support through capacity building is absolutely huge because that gives them the opportunity to be able to reach out and connect with more people, more resources. So I love that ABPC is doing that.
Right. So we'll do that a couple of different ways. One, we'll have the first Black repository in the state of Arkansas.
Woo! First Black, yes. Giving Tuesday, we're the Black, and that's off limits. That's amazing, Derek.
So, and then will be this conduit that connects resources to other philanthropists. And so being this connector, so connecting to other organizations that are in the field, that are doing similar work, connecting to philanthropists who have this like-minded, soul-minded, that will connect to again, to the grassroots work is very important. And then we have to be a learning community.
That's right.
And so, not to get in our private conversation, we're always jiving off, bouncing off each other, collecting ideas.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that our cohorts are serving Black-led organizations, Black-serving organizations, that we have this community that we learn. So we're going to create a variety of learning opportunities, speaker series that would do that. Also, we talked a lot about that we're not starting from a deficit.
No.
And so that philanthropy is not new to our community.
No.
And so we got to be able to tell our story. So we're going to be commissioning a report on Black philanthropy in the state, which I'm really excited about. And we'll be working with the Clinton Center, Dr. Williams and the Clinton Center for that. But the one thing I'm most really excited about is that we will be launching our Black Philanthropy podcast.
Yes, podcast. Listen, I don't have to be the first on the podcast.
You won't be the last.
All right, as long as I'm not the last. Yes, I want to unpack just a few things you said, Derek. You talk about a repository. That's really important because one of the things we talked about today is the idea of being able to collectively pool our resources. So often we're working individually, but the fact that ABPC is going to be a repository, it's going to be a place where everybody can put resources, and then through the research, through the information, through the help, we'll be able to figure out the best way to make sure that those who need it most get those resources. Right. So being an African-American led repository for the state of Arkansas is huge. And like Derek said, it's not just starting here. You have these across the country. And so we've got amazing people like the panelists we saw today that are already doing it. So the groundwork has already been laid. Our ancestors have been doing it for thousands of years. But now we're going to make sure in Arkansas that we're doing it right. So that's pretty amazing.
And the why behind all those things we talked a lot about inequities today. And so one of the things that we'll have a pinpoint focus on is going to be the wealth equity gap. We got to address that. We'll address that in our podcast. We'll address that in our web learning series. We'll address that in our repository. But if we're going to talk about philanthropy, we got to talk about collectively lifting up the economics in our communities. So
I love that education component. That is absolutely important. You can't empower people. You can't move forward. You can't do the research without knowing, like we always have said, knowing where you come from, but also recognizing the barriers and what has held us back. And a lot of that has been the racial wealth equity gap. So learning about that, right, understanding what that is, even being able to communicate that to other people, and then figuring out and using the resources that ABPC is going to have to hopefully close that gap. Not hopefully, we are going to do it, right? Our words are powerful. As you said, being able to tell our own stories. And so we're going to be able to do that through ABPC. So again, another amazing initiative coming in 2022.
So obviously we haven't done this alone. We can't do it alone. So I'm excited about 2022. But 2021 really was this collective effort of these folks that came together, this core group that came together and said, we got to do this. The time is right. Obviously, you're part of that conversation in this think tank group. Yeah. And so I just want to make sure that as we do this work, that we continue to lift up the folks that are in the field of philanthropy, those who are supporting ABPC, whether it's financially or I'm going to call it sweat equity. And so I just want to share who our committee is, steering committee is, because these are folks that I consider my mentors. I'm so humbled that I'm chair, but I understand very clearly that the folks that we're working with really are the heart of Black philanthropy in the state. So folks like Reverend Corey Anderson at Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, Jordan Benson, Dr. Jordan Benson at the University of Arkansas, who was one of our panelists earlier today, Kent Bronson, the second, University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service, Kim Davis at the Walton Family Foundation, Tamika Edwards, which is my sister at Central Arkansas Water, and of course you, Key, we cannot forget about you and the work that you do here, and we'll talk about that surely. Before we Scott Hamilton at the Urban League, who we're working with on these young black professionals and making sure that they're engaged in this work. Lena Hayes at the Baptist Health Foundation, which we're working on a lot of the health equity pieces. Reverend Chantel Hinton Hill over at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. David Lewis at the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. Charlotte Williams over at the Clinton Arkansas Public Services. And then Charles Stewart, who's over the Arkansas Hall of Black Fame. These folks are pouring not only into me, but the organization.
I have learned so much already, but when you talk about like Black excellence, these are people who are super passionate about Black philanthropy in Arkansas, but about Arkansas, period. And so I know that ABPC is in good hands. Again, we're laying an amazing foundation because of those that we have. And I feel so blessed and honored to be a part of this. Listen, I'll do whatever you need. I have such a servant's heart, and so I'm just blessed beyond anything I can think of. You know, which so cool. And I'm gonna say this real quick because I know we gotta wrap it up. But to see all of the recipients that received $25,000, amazing organizations across the state doing great things, and so I know ABPC will continue to do things like this moving forward.
Well, today is Give Tuesday, and so it's important. We've talked throughout the day about, obviously, this is not our first time giving.
Yeah.
It won't be our last time giving, but this collective giving. And so today is Give Tuesday. We have started the Give Black Arkansas Fund, which is designated to support general charitable purposes with a focus on organization and programs supporting Black communities in Arkansas. Why this is important, as we talk about capacity building, as we talk about repositories and being a conduit connectors, ABPC has to be first in making sure that we're investing in the community. So we've started this fund, and then the Derek Lewis Foundation, our family has decided to pledge $10,000 to the Give Black.
That's amazing. Wow, what an amazing feat. What a great way to start Giving Tuesday.
So, well, you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? And so while we're pledging our $10,000, we're hoping that you would be gracious enough to contribute and work with us and help us as we lift up these communities. I know you saw throughout the day the slide that says giveblackarkansas.org, which is the Give Black Fund. That's how you can give. You can give as little as $25 to that fund. And again, you can visit giveblackarkansas.org, which will have all the ways that you can give towards the fund. So this is such a monumental day, and we hope that you share your stories with us. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. And I just want to shout out to our team, Adina and Kara, who are behind the scenes today, who are making all this possible. But please share your stories, because your stories are our stories, and we want to lift up.
As Derek said, it is Giving Tuesday. Thank you so much for all the people who have made this amazing day possible. As he said, it is Giving Tuesday, and so we want to party with a purpose here at Mosaic Templars. So we hope that you will join us tonight. We have an amazing MTCC After Dark, a block. So we hope that you'll join us tonight. Derek, you gonna be there tonight?
Why wouldn't I be? yeah, of course I'm there. Blocking the house. And so before we leave, though, I just speakers, panelists, this program committee, writing associates, all these folks who are community partners, we want to make sure that want you to know that we're going to continue to walk by you. And I want to certainly again thank Adina and Kara, who really are my backbone. Last but not least, I cannot say this without talking
I don't know why, but they have taken an interest. I call Sharice TT, and the Winthrop Rockefeller has major investments into not just the projects, but to the organization. And so thank you, and thank you for joining us today. Again, Key, I'm looking forward to tonight as 5 to 7, the soul of giving. I love that. But again, I want to thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you too.